Hello.
Now, test. Okay, you're good. Put that in there. You can stick that on the side. Just make sure you don't have your cell phone because it
Okay.
makes funky noises.
Hello.
All right, so it's 10 o'clock. Let's get started. So I want to introduce three folks, and then I'll let them introduce the rest of their team. So we have Bernie from FIS, API, EPO, Gateway, hashtag buzzword.
MLUSA, yeah, all the letters.
And we have Scott and Setu, and they're going to lead the presentation on the API this morning. We've got plenty of time, so you can ask questions. We've got some time at the end for a little bit more Q&A and some group facilitated discussion around which API calls you might want to use or whatnot. Did everybody look at the Word doc that I slacked out yesterday? Okay, good. It'd be good to have a handle on that as you go into your one-on-one meetings later today and tomorrow. So we're going to videotape this so that way you can use it with your technical teams. Make sure you use a microphone, so whether you're up here presenting or you're asking a question, grab a mic, turn it on, give it a couple of seconds to get active, and then be sure to use that.
Part doesn't want
up here. I looked at Scott's deck a couple of days ago. It was fantastic. There's lots of great information. So I'm going to go pretty fast and then we'll get ready to ask a question. Scott, I'll turn it over to you. Great.
Great. Well, welcome. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be part of the Venture Center experience here. Just wanted to kick things off first, and then I'll hand it over to Bernie and to Setu. But this is the first time that I think all of us have been part of this opportunity, and just really excited to be here. So we're hopeful that we can assist all of you in making yourselves successful in what you're trying to do, and hopefully a little bit you can help us evolve what we're trying to do as well. I thought I would just start by giving you a little bit of background of my career here at FIS. So I've been at FIS for a little over, I think we were talking last night, a little over 22 years. And it's kind of funny because just initially when I started, one of the first projects I had was creating APIs. All right, so we started on a mainframe system, our IBS banking platform. We'll talk about that later today. But just ever since then, 6 months into it, we're creating APIs off that system. Ever since, it's been product development, consuming them, building new products. That turned into needing more APIs, different types of APIs. Mostly it's been focused on system integration across the company, trying to get our own applications to work. About in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, we were really committed to the SOA concept, opening up everything from a SOAP-based API kind of service. Really, it was the first time that we've committed to opening up and trying to allow applications to fully consume APIs to build their own applications on top of our services. And just ever since then, it's just obviously continuing to evolve. And I think where we're at today is just to even continue to open that up further. So at that point in time, we're Metavante, or M&I Data Services, which I'm not sure if you've all heard of. We were about 5,000 employees at the time, and now we're about 55,000 at FIS. So I kind of bring that up a little bit to do an introduction, but also to just give you a landscape of that kind of evolution happened in Metavante, but it also happened across FIS in like every business line there is at FIS, and we'll get a little bit into that as well. So when Rob Lee came into the organization about 2 years ago, he quickly observed that the one thing that FIS was lacking and needed to really invest in is the ability to have a developer platform where we can really begin to innovate and move our products forward. And in order to do that, we needed a platform to be able to discover APIs, sign up for APIs, and more easily consume APIs. But what you'll see is we're early in the journey. We still have a lot of legacy type of interfaces and capabilities. Really hoping to work with you to help prioritize and evolve all of those interfaces and try to align them with what you're trying to accomplish as well. So with that, I guess what we wanted to do here is just go through an overall agenda for today. So we'll start by, we did a little bit of introductions, but we kind of want to show you a little bit broader of what the team looks like. The team that's hopefully here to support.
Can I just confirm, are we going to be able to see this presentation later or get access to it?
I'm fine with that if we want to pass that forward. Yeah, so we'll go through introduction. So there's a team of people who are in the Little Rock area that are local. Where we'll be able to offer some assistance in person. Some of us are remote, and we'll coordinate those as well. Bernie will go over the API strategy. Bernie's our product owner for the product. Then we'll talk a little bit about the landscape of APIs. What do we have in the company? What's available? And a lot of this will be just trying to give you an appreciation for the breadth of what's out there and available, and what we need to do together to kind of navigate FIS and try to figure out where we need to go for your particular purpose. And then we'll go into an overview of the gateway solution itself. So say two, we'll leave that. And then after we get a little bit of appreciation of all of that, we'll just talk about, okay, what do we need to do? What do you need to explicitly do with us? How do you get something moving, and how do we work together to move some of these concepts forward? So, and then if we have some time at the end here, we'll just open it up and maybe just try to brainstorm on what, other particular things that we want to do. And I think we've got time with each of you or each of you over the next couple of days, and we can get into more detail on those as well. So, that sounds good. We'll start with the introduction. So, again, my name is Scott Meyer. So, I've got responsibilities for architecture in our enterprise product organization. So I've got two major focuses there. We've got not only the gateway, the API gateway, which is a technology solution that spans the company, but also the architecture for our next generation core banking platform, which is coming soon. So those are my two focuses. Bernie?
Bernie Schramm. I'm also in our VP organization in our enterprise strategy team. My focus has been channels. As part of that role, I'm also now the product manager for our API gateway, and looking at how we take it to market, how we work with our clients to kind of solution that, and kind of helping prioritize what are the APIs that are going to be the most impactful, where we need to do the plug and play, some new development, things like that. Just on background, I've been with the company 3 years. Prior to that, 13 years with Bank of America as a client of FIS. So I've seen both sides of the fence, and I think that serves us well as we look at how we best serve our clients and modernize some of the technology. This is one element of that whole next-gen transformation.
Some of you may have worked with Lisa Strickland. So Lisa couldn't be here today, but Lisa is the program manager for this particular initiative and for API Gateway. She also leads and directs the PMO for EPO. So Lisa wears a lot of hats.
Lisa is the person, when we have calls between us and Rob Lee's group, Lisa's the project manager for writing down what we said and who's supposed to do what. She's really good, by the way.
We appreciate it. She keeps us all in line, so we appreciate that. EPO is Enterprise Product Organization, and what that is it's an organization that sort of sits strategically over the assets, at least at this point in time, of our banking and payments division. And one of the focuses is just looking across all of those product lines and trying to understand strategy, integration, and in a lot of cases, new product development. PMO is our project management office. So in your big corporate offices like us, we all need to have our own PMO for a lot of different reasons. So.
Scott, might be worth adding, just because I get the perspective helps understand some of the things we're doing here. So if you look at how banking and payments is organized, we have lines of business that are very focused to different markets based on the size of banks, or when you get into areas like wealth management, things like that. And those lines of business tend to be very product focused, very P&L driven, and they're out there trying to hit their sales targets, their revenue targets every day. That's their mission, more power to them. So with EPO as a peer organization, those lines of business, it gives us the ability to look across the products and technology that we have. Part of our mission in modernizing things is to drive a component-based strategy. So we look across those organizations, look for opportunities to grab a piece of technology, a component, do whatever we need to do to wrap it to be used more broadly, and then drive the adoption across the organization. So we're trying to find that leverage that exists across our different lines of business and bring it across the
Good. And Mike Rogers is in the building, but I think Mike said you got woken up at like 3:30 this morning. Oh, there he is. Oh. Hey, all right. Go ahead, Mike.
A little bit of my background, I've been with FIS for approximately 29 years. And started with the systematic several times. Definitely needed that time. It must have been a long time ago. So, no, we're really glad to be here. We're glad to have you guys come in and move forward.
So I don't know if you caught that, but there's a couple people that are working for Mike that are going to be partly assigned to work with us and work with you guys on this team. Now, they got really good jobs too, but they actually have volunteered to, I think that's right, isn't that right? And I think we're going to see how that works, but there'll be people that you know, they're here in Little Rock, they're part of FIS, and they should help you in communication with people with FIS, setting up times to talk to people in FIS, and they don't know this yet, but they will work with the people that we assign as your mentors who are the senior people. Some of you have those now, some we still haven't made that connection, but they'll also work with those people to kind of
Yes, and most of them are sitting behind you.
Yep. We'll introduce you.
Setu, Setu, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then maybe the rest of the teams
Yeah,
as
I'm
well.
Setu Totikamanth. My title is Development Director, so I'm responsible for the API gateway development. I've been with FIS for past 10 years, but I was primarily responsible for the front-end channel development, which products which called Touchpoint, which primarily runs on the systematics and profile platform. Then my association with EPO started like 1.5 years back. So primarily I came in, when we started getting onto this digital bandwagon and, started exploring options as to how to enable our APIs on our core system. So I've been working very closely with Scott and team to go through various vendor evaluations of the API gateway products that's there out in the market. And then we have now, primarily selected one vendor and we have started our development on that. So primarily my role is everything related to API development, getting the requirements for API development, work internally with different lines of business to strategize how to enable their cores and expose what they have as part of their existing assets in form of APIs out, more of their existing system APIs out as experience APIs, and then, work through the process of what makes sense in, exposing those APIs out as part of our assets. So primarily here, I'm glad to be here, working with you all, and I have my development team here. They are based out of Little Rock. They are primarily the technical architects on the gateway product, but we want to be very closely associated with you, understand your requirements, and see how we can help you in your journey, and so that, we can get something going quickly, so that, as you're building your front-end products, how we can enable those using the APIs.
Yeah, and then we'll just wrap up here, but on the intros. But here's the team themselves. So all of the folks you see here are the people who are here in the Little Rock area. So these are the folks that will spend some time in the office and they'll be working with as well. We've got the gateway team who are truly dedicated to the gateway development, and the support team, as Collins had described earlier. And then we've got a few folks in an extension in our Bangalore offices as well. So we're continuing to build out that development team. So we've got about 10 different people
Yep.
that are in the Bangalore team. And the way that this kind of works is we've got a core team that does development. We're really an incubation team or a support team to get other lines of businesses onboarded, involved, and actually have them contribute their own content directly. So it goes broader than this team, but this is the core team that's helping.
Yeah, so we have these architects here who primarily gather the requirements, strategize what needs to be done, and primarily we have the team offshore who can churn out what is required. So that's how we sort of divide our work.
All right. With that, we'll just keep moving ahead here and hand it over to Bernie and talk some strategy.
Okay, so I'm going to start giving a little background on our strategy, our thinking, and how we're starting our journey here. So on the next slide, one of the interesting things when you look at the history of FIS, we are a product-centric company. We've built a lot of products over time. We've acquired a lot of companies and their product portfolios, either expand that portfolio of offerings or to fill gaps as we went forward. So, key areas around banking and funds transfer, even backbone networks, when you think of debit and ATM card networks, things like that, loyalty and merchant services capabilities, analytics, probably a newer opportunity for us. We've always had a lot of data. We're now starting to really take an active role in how do we take advantage of that data and use it in different ways. But it's a pretty wide mix of newer, modern, open applications, as well as a pretty good basket of older, more monolithic, not so open applications. And as we really think about where FIS is going and how we want to service our client base, we want to shift from being product-focused to a solutions-focused company, supporting financial services in a variety of ways. And as what it means to be a financial service provider evolves, when you have fintech disruptors coming in offering some of these services in sort of a niche way, It's very appealing from the customer standpoint and getting a lot of buzz in our clients. What just falls into the traditional financial services umbrella, it's not old style banking and investments. It's a wide range of money movement, really getting into how people transact as they go about their day. Now they have this mobile device, on their hip that can do virtually anything they can conceive of. So for us to shift to solutions based, we've got to open up our portfolio of applications. So we've really put a lot of focus on how do we put an API strategy in place, how do we provide these services in a coordinated fashion across a lot of different applications, a lot of different underlying technologies that some do that better than others. Part of that strategy is tooling, part of it is standards and documentation so that this is all usable. But that's really the journey that we've started here. So 3 basic use cases that really are the big chunk primary ones that started the conversation. And expanding the banking business into new territories. So this was really a very inwardly focused discussion within FIS. Hey, we need to modernize some of our technology. We need to get new applications and new capabilities to market faster. We've got to be able to incorporate new technologies that are emerging at an ever-increasing rate. So how do we make our systems more open, provide that integration in a much easier fashion? And then how do we expose all of the things that we have across our internal development community? So if I'm in, product line X and I have an idea, how can I find out what other lines of business have that I can take advantage of to create this new solution? So a lot of it is just how do we open up not just the technology and business capabilities, but all of the power that we have across our enterprise, 55,000 employees at this point in locations all over the world. So there's almost a logistics problem that goes with the technology problem. And that really started us on the journey. But once you start to develop that base, now how can we bring that ability to innovate and that speed to market to our clients who oftentimes now want to mix the products they have from FIS with some of their own innovation and product development to drive differentiation in something they're very good at or a niche in the market that they want to attack. Sometimes it also means going to other third parties and bringing their tools in to integrate with ours. So we've got to help enable that model because that's where there's a lot more interest as we go forward. And that's just a product of what's happened with the digital economy and fintechs and some of the disruption that's happened out there. The third big case, so if you're an average bank, a smaller bank that kind of outsources all of your technology to FIS, and so we host all those applications and run the stack for you, you're kind of going to fit into what we're doing in that first use case, because that kind of permeates our product stack. But if you're a larger financial institution, there's a good chance that you run your own data centers, you run a mix of products from FIS, some of our competition, things that you've built in-house. So when we start to bring our products into that environment, it's an interesting integration challenge. Now our componentization strategy will make some of that easier because now we've got all these little blocks that are kind of built with an API input-output philosophy from the ground up. And they're made to fit in our stack and into a different stack. But how we take some of our other legacy applications and fit in that world more easily. Today what we do, frankly, is we put together a very large professional services engagement. We put an army of folks on it. We force it in there and we make it happen, but it can be slow and it can be expensive. When we think about the open API model, it really changes that formula. And that's exciting and that's really a big driver for some of the new conversations we're having with clients. So from a value prop, think about all the different business capabilities, functions, data, things that we do from an FIS perspective that we can now expose to our bank and FI clients through APIs, through a gateway mechanism that kind of deals with all the technical issues of managing those APIs, as well as now providing development tools that we won't just use in-house, but now we can provide to our banker clients. And their development shops can now access these APIs, go through some of the same discovery to see what's there, what they have access to, how they can use them. They can start to build apps and test against that. So now they have a lot of power, a lot of flexibility to do things on their own, accessing all of our applications, data, business capabilities, and for the benefit of their customers. Or they can also start to expose some of those services out to their partners, some of their customers, think small business clients who may have some of their own applications they use in-house. They like to get to some of this data as opposed to use a bank's application or one of our applications that they're kind of pigeonholed into today. And as we get more open here, we can also get more open out to them. This also is a way for our client banks to start to offer those traditional banking services into the digital economy where they've been sort of pushed aside because they haven't been able to play. And those disruptors have been able to get in there and really get a foothold in certain places. But now we're going to flip that equation a little bit on them. And we talk about letting our banks, compete as opposed to compete with these banks, because or these other disruptors. Because now they're going to have the same technology, the same open access, they're going to be able to get into there and stay pertinent. Because the risk is that the banks aren't necessary anymore. In certain areas we bumped up against the fringe of whether that's actually true or not. So, this is one of those opportunities, points of inflection where we're going to snatch back. Banks want to own financial services for our customers. We can help them deliver all the things that the disruptors can do, but now instead of taking a little tiny niche within that whole range of financial services and functions and things, they can attack the whole population of it. So those relationships between a customer and a bank stay important. There's still value there. So that brings us to the gateway itself, because the gateway is a tool to help us in building and deploying and using these APIs or these business services. And there's really three categories of functionality that a gateway provides. And there's lots of providers of gateway technology in the marketplace. We looked at a number of them. We've standardized on one from a provider, WSO2. But we also recognize that we will have large financial institution clients that have picked other technologies. So we've got to make sure that we build our APIs in such a way that we can deploy them on our gateway, but also be able to deploy them into other gateway technologies as we work with our clients. But I'm going to start at the bottom here. API service management. So this is the core of what the gateway does. It's actually servicing up these APIs so that they can be consumed and used in a production environment as applications are calling them. It's handling the security, who's accessing them. Do they have, does the institution or the customer have the right to call that API? Does the application they're using have the right? We can enable those entitlements at a lot of different levels in different ways based on the situation. Throttling, so how many calls are coming in at what rate? Is it bumping up against a limit that we've just set on a particular API or an API for an application? Is it actually reaching a point where our infrastructure is being taxed? And so we just want to kind of rein things down a little bit and not lose control of that environment. And we can set that up in a lot of different ways. So this is kind of running the API environment, watching its health at all times. It's logging information that's going to drive our analytics piece. So lots of things going on there. And it can generate all sorts of alerts. Some of them come out of the box, and then we can define those for whatever makes sense for us as operators of that, or for our clients as users and consumers of those APIs. From an analytics standpoint, what the gateway does is logs virtually every call that comes in, all sorts of information about who's doing that call, what technology came in, how did it perform. So we can run reports, we can get dashboard views, like I said, we can get real-time alerts in certain situations, so we can understand very clearly what's going on with our developers and how they're building apps and what APIs are they using. And then when those APIs are called, who's calling them, what institutions, what applications, what end customers might be coming through, how are they performing, all that good stuff lets us really understand how APIs are used. Think about as we go forward, we start to version APIs. So we make an enhancement, we start moving consumers of those to the new version. Over time, we may ultimately deprecate the old version. We can see exactly who's still calling the old one. We can reach out to them, talk to them, make sure we understand how we can get them off of that as that becomes necessary. So some of that visibility into what's going on in that API world, very important. And then probably the key for what started this whole journey, the developer services. So part of what the gateway provides is a developer core. And this gives you visibility into all the APIs that are available. It lets you register if you're a new user. Lets you see the APIs, what all the different calls are, different parameters, different operations that you can perform. Lets you see the input fields and actually do tests where you can set those, see a response and what the output is, see documentation that's there. Some of it's sort of inherent in the gateway and how it manages those APIs. We're also trying to standardize the documents so that as we're building APIs across all of our business units, what we can provide to our clients is fairly standard and that experience is good for them. And that may be one of the toughest things we actually do here in the first year. But it provides an environment where as an app developer, you can go in, you can test, you can hit a sandbox, different environments, and progress your application all the way to production through tools that are available in that developer portal. This is kind of a teaser because I think we're actually going to do a demo of the live utility. So when you come into it, you basically get a view of groups of APIs by what you're entitled to see as a developer or with the institution based on what they've contracted to have access to. So pick a group, you get a list of detailed APIs. You can then go into a specific API and see all of the different operations that you can perform with that, blow them out and see the details of that, the documentation associated with it. And then a couple of examples of some of the dashboard views to understand what's going on with the API that you may be using or you may have built and made available here in the apps or the developer portal. This has got a couple of sample dashboard views or graphs. This particular one is how many subscribers you've got to different APIs.
It's on the API usage, yeah. It's on the API usage, which API gets used more. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And on the next one, this gives you an idea. You can look at API users or the API usage itself. You can set time parameters, look at a particular hour, look at it over a month or a series of months. So lots of different ways to cut the data to really understand what's going on with those services. And one more thing is we kind of look at just how big is the opportunity or how big is the challenge for us in putting content out on the gateway. So we deploy our applications in a number of different ways, but probably three main categories. And one is we operate in the ASP mode. So we've got some big multi-tenant applications that run in a big instance in our data centers on behalf of a number of clients, and usually that's in the hundreds. And so that's running, that's very efficient, it's very cost effective for our clients, and it's our favorite model, quite frankly. We also do a lot of software licensing. So for the larger financial institutions who operate their own data centers, we can license it and they can run our software in-house. Sometimes it's all there, sometimes they're interacting with pieces that we still host. Lots of different opportunities to work within that. And then finally, we do some outsourcing where we kind of run the data center on behalf of our clients. So it's a dedicated instance. We're not sharing any instances or infrastructure. So it's for Bank X and it's all their stuff is very segregated. So another model, some clients like that isolation, a little more expensive obviously. But so when we talk about opening up these different applications and being able to integrate, it's across different kinds of deployment models, different physical data centers back and forth, some with the client, some with us. So there's a lot of different variations of what we have to work through. They create some interesting complications. We also have all these legacy applications that operate in these different models. We've already done a lot of development as far as mid-tier services. We have our own kind of internal bus that we use. We deploy to a lot of ESVs at our clients that operate their own data centers. So we kind of work within that structure and where Infinity Connect is one of those internal service bus mediation layers that now is going to work very closely with our gateway as we develop. And then when you start to look at what's really in the product portfolio. Oh, sure.
So we were an in-house shop. Do you have any percentage of how many of your banks are in-house versus outsourcing? Are they moving? Because most of the banks I talked to, if they were in-house, they are making the migration because they're realizing in-house is just too costly now.
It's a great
So are you
question.
finding that trend?
In the largest banks, those are the ones that tend to still be in-house right now. On the community lot of smaller institutions, credit unions, things like that, like some of these will run on PC on their desk.
Yeah.
Single branch kind of institution. Hey, exactly. And it's sort of scary when you think about some of the implications we deal with security and stability and resiliency, but you'd be surprised how many mom and pops still operate that way. But you're right, there is a shift. It's more, and it's some of the challenges that come with how do you operate in a world with hackers and attacks going on all the time, and resiliency concerns being driven by the regulators. You meet so many more requirements today, it becomes very difficult for a bank that isn't, a technology company on the side, like some of the big ones have to become. So a number of them are starting to now bring that back, let us host the court. And like I said, we actually prefer that model. We like that annuity that's predicted, the revenue stream that goes with it, those long-term contracts.
All of that becomes easier, right?
Absolutely.
For them and for you.
Yeah, it's a win.
So still about 70-30, but you're seeing,
But it's shifting.
oh, serious.
In the LFI space, we actually get into conversations. And so the other model that starts to come into play now, which is sort of the hybrid of some of this, is the cloud, how we're starting to deploy certain capabilities that way. And we're now coming out of an environment where our internal risk management folks were very hesitant. And really it was the banks sort of saying, hey, we want to play with some of these third parties that are using the cloud. We think it's a more cost-effective model for deploying certain things. We understand and are willing to accept the risk. UFIS, you need to kind of get with the program. So we've had to go in and do some pretty heavy work with some of those big providers that you all can recognize the names of to get comfortable with their environments and their models and be able to work with them. So that's also kind of
So Bernie, could you say that even split among the major platforms, major core platforms that FIS runs, you still have this breakdown of possibilities of where it might be hosted?
There are. Now, there are certain platforms like IBS is in-house only. There is no deployed flexible version. That's the old Metafont primary platform.
There's some clients that's great. Some software.
Well,
We always have.
yeah, that's true. That's
But
the official product for a while.
But as they deal with banks and going through FIS, they could run into situations that are any of those depending on the bank.
Absolutely.
So it may be that the only way they can operate is in one of those environments like the ASP environment, that limit who they can work.
That's true.
like Bernie was saying, we're seeing a lot of new offerings come to us, and they want to look at ASP. So the outsourcing, what Bernie said, get a lot more lucrative contracts with that. But they really want a simplified offering. They want an ASP, simple, keep my costs down.
So we're going to have to work with probably where things are going is you're going to see more of a mixture of all the different deployment models coming into play. And one of the things, so you think about what our componentization strategy combined with our API, open access strategy across business capabilities, it really enables the client to sort of mix and match and go best of breed across a number of vendors and providers. So obviously we want to start with being that core provider, that transaction processing engine that houses the accounts and customer profiles, and then sort of growing out from there, helping them enable the best mix of capabilities and user experience applications, things like that. So the numbers here vary all the time depending on who's counting and how. But our current best view, 26 product areas, over 630 some products. This has sort of been updated since we completed the SunGuard acquisition and brought those applications into the fold. Pick any one of these, and there's all sorts of variations, sometimes by platform, where we can deploy it across a number of technologies, by those models in-house versus our ASP model, for instance. And any one of these 600 some applications, as we API enable it, could have dozens of APIs associated with it. So over time, this is a very large catalog of services that they can deploy.
I think you just answered my question. So all these are not
represent applications. Some of them could be a very small digital app that's very focused, and some of these are very large holistic banking platforms like
Kind of nice share spaces, so you have to just have somebody extra access to some person by access.
Yeah, so we'll get into some more of the details here, and one of the things that we want to do over the next couple of days as we talk with each of you is kind of understand what are some of the things that you're looking for, would like to integrate with, and how we might be able to help. Just a taste, so pick a category, here's core processing, this is just the top 10 core platforms that are in play. Many of them are deployed in different capacities in different ways. Next slide hits loyalty. So here you've got card systems, merchant offers is up there. This tends to be much more of an outsourcing model just by the type of business and the type of services that we're dealing with. The next one, wealth management. Here's one where we only had a couple of offerings on the legacy FIS side, and with SunGuard joining the family last year, now we have a much broader portfolio of applications and capabilities that we can offer. And again, a lot of different deployment models that come into play. So where we stand today, oh, go ahead.
Sure, if it's possible, it's slide that.
Yeah, we're going to share. Yeah.
Do you have equal access to the data, whether it's in different versions of the institutions, right? So it's ASP versus outsourcing. For example, have equal access to the data in the warehouse at API?
If it's on our platforms, yes. If it's deployed, in a license model to a client data center, now we get into, does the client want to share it back, or how is it being used, and some of those things. So there's a mixture there, based on the situations, based on contractual relationships. One of the things that we're doing, I mentioned analytics is sort of a new space for us and really taking advantage of the data. We've got, if you think of all the banks that we're processing in some way for it, just unbelievable amounts of transactional data that flows through. So how do we now take advantage of that to really do some deep behavioral desire type things in an anonymized way, but that we can possibly monetize and get back to whether it's our client banks. We have conversations with some of the investment houses and hedge funds because we're seeing transaction data flowing through the card network pretty much instantaneously. Gives us a leg up on other providers of transactional data, so it's the whole timing thing. It's really a weird environment now where data is this product that has real value and people are starting to compete and fight for it.
And just to elaborate on that, so in the hosted model, in a lot of cases, it's actually the gateway itself will be an additional licensed product option for them. So it may not run through our hosted version of the gateway, but the idea is that we've got the content in a standardized way so that when they deploy our licensed capabilities, their gateway can be opened up very easily to offer the same kind of capabilities. So you may have different endpoints, but the capabilities will be available in all of these environments.
Right. And I focus on talking about our capabilities, but we also, through our gateway will expose third-party APIs that go hand in hand. So now there's a consistent way to access those complementary business functions regardless of the provider, one security model, one monetization model, those types of things. So today, obviously e-banking is a hot area for these APIs. That's probably where we're doing our first proof of concept work with the API or the developer portal with a couple of clients now. I'm going to jump over here to payments because that's the other area of maturity in-house where we've had APIs going out to various partners for some of those different payment services for e-wallets and things like that. And we're actually have been doing our production pilot work for the gateway with our global retail payments arena and some of their existing APIs. When it comes to the cores and our big transaction processing engines and some of those big banking platforms, that's where our focus is to get content out there. In some cases, IBS and Profile, they actually started building REST services last year. So there's an existing catalog that we want to grow and want to get exposed on the gateway. Our next-gen banking, our new core and our set of business components that we're using to augment some of our legacy core platforms, those have been built assuming API integration patterns are the way to go. So those things have APIs that we're beginning to expose. Some of these are really tied to systematics today. That's sort of the first instance, or an IDS in a couple cases. So there's some complementary API exposure going on there. Horizon is our biggest platform by total number of clients in the community space. And it's really the target longer term for some of the ones that we'd like to retire in the long term. So Horizon is an I-series application. So it is not on the most open technology base to start with. So we've got some work to do to really get the API exposure that we want to get there. And I talk about, oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I guess just, I mean, don't understand a couple of these more in depth. Obviously, you're familiar with Yodel and being able, I see the balance inquiry part of what they offer.
Right.
Transactions, and that'd be up to the last 3 months of transactions. With that information.
It will be some period of time, to be determined or based on the model, but yes.
And then you can sort of just look at the process better. Just looking at the reviews where that actually.
That's where we're going. So, and I talk about 2017 as the year of content because we're going to have the infrastructure there. We're just trying to put our arms around any existing services. There's a bunch of SOAP services out there that we can mine. We'd like to get REST transformations of a lot of those for really the digital exposure and use. But we're kind of taking whatever anyone has or where we have related project work and taking advantage of it this year to get as many types of services across as many platforms as we can. But there's going to be differences based on what's there today. As we go into 2018 and beyond, our focus is going to shift a little bit to how do we get to that standard set of services that represent the FIS APIs and how to get to that. So a balance inquiry API would look the same across all of these different cores and account types. So that's going to come, won't be there right now, but that's where we want to go. And that's where you really start to see the opportunities for the App Store approach, where we can partner with different third parties, build extensions that now don't just apply to one of our core platforms, they can apply to a broad range of those cores. That's a very powerful operating model.
Yeah, and the way the content gets exposed will also evolve. So a lot of what you'll see here are, we call them like system APIs, sort of coarse grain capabilities that are out on the gateway. But as use cases define themselves and demand defines themselves, the idea is to transform them into more functional, simplified, targeted APIs that are trying to focus on what the channels are requiring. So that's just an evolution as we get users on the APIs, as we understand the usage models, those APIs will evolve.
With that, we're going to turn it over to Setu to get into the weeds.
I have this.
Oh, you're level.
Yep, I'm fine. You want to do the demo out of that or?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to replug it here.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have the latest slides here, isn't it? So
Yeah, what's that?
you have the latest PowerPoint, correct?
Yeah.
So I think I'll cover the PowerPoint and then do the demo on this. Yeah.
So there was some work that was launched really a couple of years ago, very narrowly focused, but to start to open up Horizon. And they've been working on a replacement for their sales and service UI, and they're working on their teller platform now. Out of that, we're going to get some services. And in fact, we think we're going to be able to get a couple out of here near term and just get them out there for exposure. But we'll be able to expand that population. They have APIs through a third-party integration mechanism that's sort of older. Doesn't necessarily meet the rest of the patterns that we'd like to go forward with. So, sort of,
What about those other platforms that are all lumped under the community banking business unit? That's all a bunch of them that they bought. That's not Horizon.
so I suggest.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all those.
It is a great question, and
Okay?
Turn over to API Gateway Overview and download.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do here was, run through a couple of slides explaining the gateway architecture and, how the gateway fits into the FIS ecosystem. And then after that, I'll just go into a demo of a gateway and show how the APIs are exposed on the developer portal. And, once you get access into the API gateway, how you can come and create your own application and get access to some of those APIs to execute them. So what we have here is, the whole gateway is as part of our ecosystem is called the Infinity Integration Suite. So as you can see here, Bernie talked about different core systems. So we have all these core systems, about 632, different products out there. So what gateway is going to be is the single entry point into all those products. So that's the whole philosophy around the gateway. So what you see here is you have different bank app, you have, the developer portal, you have different client apps, which primarily will come into FIS assets through the FIS API gateway, which basically sits here on the top of all our existing assets. And then that's primarily on top of the Infinity Connect. Infinity Connect is our, the middle tier, which basically has all the existing services for the existing core applications. And then that is enabled through the API gateway. So there is well-defined responsibility between the two layers. And this, so what primarily gateway does is, that's where, when you come in as a consumer to consume the APIs, you'll be able to, register and authenticate yourselves and get access to those APIs. Also, the APIs that we publish out through the gateway, what we do is, like Bernie, when he gave the overview of the gateway, he said, you apply all the policies on those APIs. So you apply your throttling rules, what the transformation rules are, all that happens in the gateway. So gateway primarily, what we see is just, proxying it to the existing FIS assets. And then any, detailed transformation you need to do on the services, all that we do it within our Infinity Connect layer. And one of the main reasons that we do it is, when we get into the large financial institutions, they sometimes have their own gateway. So we need to be easily able to adapt their gateway. So you don't want to put a lot of our IP right into the API gateway. So with that, we, want to put it within our Infinity Connect platform so that, when you are actually going to a different gateway, then you don't have a lot of work to do to move into a different gateway. So that way we are primarily using gateway for everything to come into the FIS assets and control primarily the security, the throttling, and also then use that to generate a lot of your analytics, which can later be used for monetizing those APIs. So any questions on the architecture? So that's how it the gateway fits into the FIS ecosystem. So when we started this journey on the API gateway, when we went through a detailed, due diligence process of the gateway vendors out there. And what you see here is the gateway vendor that we have selected today. It's WSO2. We primarily went with them because they were playing more in the open source space, and we wanted a solution which, with which we can be very flexible when we adapt to it. So that's the reason we chose. And then they also met a lot of the requirements that we had in terms of, the policies that we wanted to build around the APIs that we wanted to expose out. So what you see here is the various components that come with the gateway. So you have, two aspects of the gateway. One is for the developer portion of it, which we call the API publisher, which is where a developer will go to expose an API out. So that's where you define the API, you define the inputs, outputs, the rules around the APIs, the security around the APIs, and then the whole consumer portal, which is the developer portal. So that's where you primarily, as a consumer, like you all will be a consumer of the API. So where you will be exposed is to the developer portal where you come to consume the APIs. And then once you go through the developer portal and you register yourself, you get access to the APIs and you test out the APIs. That's where once you test out the APIs you're subscribed to, you get your access tokens to access the APIs, and you also get what is the API gateway runtime environment to execute those APIs, so that you can implement that into your front-end applications to execute those APIs. So The third component that's there is the API gateway itself, which is the runtime environment, which basically, enforces the policies around the gateway from a security, from a throttling, also from any, you can also, define rules as to how you want to smoothen out the traffic so that you don't have spikes in traffic, and that's where you prevent a lot of this denial of service attacks and all that coming through. And then key management is for all the security aspects around the gateway, and traffic manager is where you handle all your throttling and all that. And then analytics is, primarily you can use it to look at the performance of your APIs, and then, you can take actions on the APIs to improve on the APIs based on how it's getting used. There is also a additional component to the gateway, which is called a developer studio. So like within our ecosystem, the way we have designed is, to minimize the amount of work that you need to do into the gateway in terms of transformation and aggregation of the services. But the gateway itself provides a tool, which is the Developer Studio, which is nothing but an Eclipse kind of a plugin, where you can actually write a lot of your mediation policies. If you want to do complex mediation to multiple services across different cores and then bring and aggregate it, you can do it within the gateway. So if you get a chance, we'll try to demonstrate it. So that's an add-on component which can be used to, build some complex transformations and complex policies around the APIs within the API gateway. So these are the main activities that goes around in the API gateway. So one is, like I said, is the publisher part of it, which is for the API creators. So it's primarily the development folks within FIS primarily using it. I don't think in your scenario you will have a need to do that, but if there is a case where we need to do it, we can definitely do it. But what primarily happens within the publisher is, this is the life cycle within a publisher. You will primarily develop the API, so you go through a process of, ideation and design and, determine what you need of the API, because a lot of the APIs that we have currently are legacy APIs. It may be SOAP APIs, but that may not be something that can be easily consumed by a front end. So as part of this process, we primarily, develop ideas around how you want to use it, and based on the usage pattern, we can develop a specific API for that needs. And then what happens as part of the development process is you build all your mediation within the gateway, then to transform it to so that it calls the legacy API underneath it, and then what you see is something that is consumable for your front end channels. So once you design and develop the APIs, basically as part of the publishing process, you will associate the SLAs around the APIs, and you will define the throttling and the security policies that need to go with it. So there are various levels of security. So primarily the inbuilt within the gateway is, they use OAuth mechanism, but you can also build fine-grained authorization based on your roles and all that, even at a resource level. So there are multiple levels you can build security. And also then for some of the, at a higher level, you can also build security policies around, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. So so that's what you define as part of this whole publishing process. And then, once you define the APIs, you can manage the entire life cycle of the APIs within it. So, so you can actually start with if you start with a concept, you can start with a prototype, and then the prototype can be converted to an actual functioning API, and then, you can then deprecate an API, you can, finally retire an API. So the whole life cycle can be managed. And how that is done is also, with a lot of the way you monitor the behavior of the API, so you can see how it is getting used. If there are APIs, over a period of time, you have multiple versions of the APIs you have released, and your earlier versions are not being used, then, you can go in and then retire those APIs. So analytics actually facilitates not only an insight into how the APIs are getting used, how it's performing, but also helps you take a lot of decisions around, what API needs to be there, and, what APIs you can remove. So that's the whole development aspect of the API gateway. Then this is where you will be more interested as a consumer of the API. So as part of the developer portal, once you get registered, you log in, you can then go through a discovery process of what APIs are there, what the catalog of APIs that is available. You can view the documentation of the APIs. You can also view samples and execute the APIs so that you get a feel of, how those API, what are the inputs, outputs needed for the APIs, what are the valid values and all that. So I will go through that as part of the demo. Then subscription is the process where you actually go to, subscribe to the APIs, get your client key, client secret, your tokens to execute the APIs, because a lot of the analytics that happens on the API is based on the keys that are specifically assigned for your application. So that's what drives a lot of the analytics around those APIs. And then you can evaluate the API. So there is, there are forums and all that available. So, you can communicate with the developers of the APIs on the, if there are additional changes needed to the APIs, that's how you communicate, and you can rate the API, and based on that, internally we as a publisher can then start taking actions on those APIs. But these parts I will, demonstrate as part of the demo that we'll quickly go through. So, one of the main, so we have been actually emphasizing on security on the gateway, because that's what we want to prevent, unauthorized use into the API. So there are several API patterns that you can implement with the gateway. So I've listed most of them here. So one way is, you can use the inherent security that comes within the gateway, but also, if there are external, if you want to connect to any external identity provider to use their facility, especially if you get into more of a single sign-on mode and all that, so you can use external identity provider and connect the gateway to that. So that way what will happen is gateway actually, when you authenticate yourselves to the external identity provider and come into the gateway will actually call back to the external identity provider to ensure that is the right person coming in with the right credentials to access the API and then let you go through. So that's one way you can do it. So you can do it through various OAuth grants. So almost all the OAuth grants are supported as part of the external identity provider, or you can use the internal OAuth access token that the gateway provides to do the security. You can also, if you have an Active Directory integration, so like within our organization, since we use Active Directory, it's all integrated to our Active Directory solution. So you can use LDAP and use that as the security mechanism to authenticate into the API gateway. Then some of the other, and other restrictions you can put is, you can have a two-way digital. So if you want to have a dedicated private, access into the gateway, you can use it using two-way digital certificate. You can also restrict by specific IPs if you want to restrict it that way. And this is either or. So, you can still have OAuth token, you can access, you can secure it through a two-way SSL, and you can also put IP restrictions if you want to add multiple layers of security to the gateway. And then for the developer portal, we plan to have internal is primarily for internal usage within the FIS, because one thing we also want to do is, we have multiple groups, isn't it? So we also want to expose our APIs to other groups within FIS. So we are actually also looking at developer portal being a way to expose even the APIs from other groups, to our own developers within the organization. Then partner is primarily our banks who will be using those APIs. And long term, I know Bernie didn't discuss that. We have vision to, whether there are APIs that we can make it generally available to public. So this primarily describes a normal pattern for execution using an external identity provider. So what you do is you primarily register the gateway, with the external identity provider as a resource owner, and then that basically takes over the security. So if you have your user application, you connect to that same external identity provider and you enter your user ID password, it basically, based on access rights, it provides you the grant. And when it provides you the grant, it also generates the tokens for you. And that same tokens get synced with the gateway. So it's just a single sign-on scenario through which, you access the APIs within the gateway. These are the analytics that is available out of the box within the gateway. So, you have analytics that you can generate on the publisher side, which primarily gives us a insight as an organization, to the usage of the APIs across the organization. Whereas when you then go into developer portal, the analytics that you develop is per user who is using the developer portal. So that is the distinction. So these are the various analytics that can be generated at the API level, application level, and the subscription level. So this primarily, you need to have access into the publisher aspect of the API gateway to look at those analytics. And then as a developer portal, when you come in and you can look at the performance of the APIs that you have subscribed to within the developer portal. But this is just, some things that come out of the box. But, all this is, like Bernie said, when we execute the APIs, everything gets recorded in the database. So there are other tools available that, we can use to then, build our own analytics on top, if you want to build any custom dashboards, custom analytics, and all on top of the data that's already available there. So having said that, I'll quickly get into a demo of the API gateway, just to show what is there, and then, we can get into how we can start engaging with you all, to get your requirements and what we can put out there to meet your requirements. Just plug this in. Is there a power outlet here? I don't want to lose the power in between. I'm low on battery, so I don't want to lose it in between.
Do you want to run it?
No, I have a cable here. I'm just looking for an outlet, power outlet.
One over there, I
Oh,
don't
there.
see extension cable.
Actually, I have a cable. I think there's no power outlet here.
Oh,
That's the problem, yeah.
let me know. Mine will work otherwise.
Yeah, let me start. I think I probably have enough to. Yeah. Maybe it's behind. So let's. Yeah, if need be, we can flip over, yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to demo is so once you have, so we tested out a couple of our URLs for the demo from here. So we do have access. So what I'm going to demo off is from our development environment, but we also have an UAT environment. So we tested it successfully that you all can get into that URL. So once you are provided these credentials, you will be able to get into those portals. So, and we have listed those URLs as part of the PowerPoint. So, once it's available, you can go in there and start using it. But we are also trying to get access to the development environment also for the APIs. So. But then, if that's not possible, the other one is anyway working, so we'll move the APIs that you need into those environments, and then you'll have access to those. So once you, so this is the front-end portal that you come into. So, there's a description of what the API is all about and what we are trying to do. So these are all general descriptions. We can change the content that we need here. And then there's also, I won't play this, but there's also an explainer video of what we are doing with the gateway. So you can look at that when you have access. So what I will do here is I'll sign in into the developer portal. So what you can see here is, Bernie had put up a slide as to the broad categories of the APIs. So some of those are listed here. So when you get, and this is all, this is all role-based and it's all controlled through credentials. So, you'll only get access to the APIs that you have. So once you have you have specific APIs that you need access to, and once your roles have been set, when you log in, you'll only have access to your APIs. You won't have access to the other APIs. You'll be only, it can be restricted through security credentials, what you have access to. But broadly, these are the various groups that will be out there. So for example, if I go in, so what we have under applications is, we did mention that, we also want to put some third-party APIs there. So like there are some samples here which we try to put in. So like we have something, our open payment framework, LinkedIn, GCO is like a PFM vendor. So we have put some of their APIs there. And then I know last year we also had a startup which was Monato. So they wanted to put something here. So we have put their APIs out here as a third-party APIs. Yeah. Client conference. Yeah. So I'll quickly go into the core application. So if you come here into the core application, we have the different APIs there. So we have some of the SOAP APIs. We have the account inquiry. So these are all on the new core, the CAPE system that we talked about earlier. Then Profile is another core system we have. And then, we have some on the IBS APIs here. So what happens is, once you have access to the APIs, like, you can go in and drill down. Okay. Yeah.
Will my developers actually have to pull the API from each of your cores, or is your vision for this, I'll go and I'll pull balance, and as you attach the different cores, I'll get more balance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so near term, it'll be an API that's specific to the core, just because that's what we have access to today.
Okay.
But our longer term vision is there will be one balance API that will call, and that can get you to any of those modules.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea. So yeah, we want to reach that. That's the perfect state where you have a common API, and then based on the certain parameters you put in, it knows which cores to go and pull the data out of.
So there'll be a place where you can pull data from all sorts of cores and then pull it into your app. But short term, it's going to be
There's that investment of the underlying platform called cross-platform services, where some of them need data, called mediation. They're constantly out there, and to be able to talk about the past, or some of that can help. How do you define the way that
And the whole idea is, once we get everything here, then, we can look at across each of those different core APIs, doing say like balance inquiry, for example, and take the best of the breed and then, make it common and then mediate it to the different cores. So that's the whole idea. So first put everything in there and then see, which makes the most sense and then build on that for all the cores. Yeah, so once you get into an API, so this is what you see, you have the details about the API, the version and the status, and then this is where you can rate the APIs. Then when you start looking at it, you have an overview of the API. So what basically it says is these are the production or the sandbox URL that you can hit to execute those APIs. It gives a brief description of the APIs and then who is the business owner or the technical owner for that API, so that, if you have any issues with those APIs whom you need to touch base with. Then you can, if you want to share this, you have all these social media actions you can make to share any details about these APIs. So once you have the overview, then this API console is where you go now to look at all the APIs that's available there. So for the deposit, like, we have the subcategories. So you have your account origination APIs, you have your, account maintenance APIs. You can then get your account closure, account reopen. So this is how you then subcategorize, within a deposit. And then once you have all those details, then you can go into each of these individual APIs. And this is where primarily, you can go and execute the API. So you can actually, so this being a SOAP service, you can add a SOAP envelope here and, you can try it out. And then you go to the documentation tab. That's where you'll have, so here we have samples. So, if you want to execute those APIs, it basically gives you sample requests that you can use to execute those APIs. So like if I go into so this primarily gives me some test data I can use to execute the API. So I can actually get the data from here and get back to that service. And I can try it out and it primarily executes it. Here actually it errored, but yeah. But I'll go into some APIs that I can execute. But this how you do it, and then what you do actually, once you come in as a new user, you wouldn't have access to those APIs. So to set yourselves up, like, you'll have to build your own application here and then subscribe to the APIs. So the whole process is, so you can go into the application here we have added several applications here, but this is where you go and say that, okay, I'll just take off saying, I'll say VC app. And then, here I can define by app, how much requests I want to allow. And these are all configurable in admin. You have some here listed. So I can say that, I will allow only 50 per minute, and then I'll create that app. So now this creates a application for me. And then if I go to the subscriptions, I have not subscribed to any of those APIs. So I can then go back to the API. So like I'll go into the core and I'll go one of the profile services. And I'll go back and select that. So I'll select VC app as the application and I'll say subscribe. So now I've subscribed the profile services to this VC app. And then here is where I go and I generate the security tokens. So now I haven't generated any tokens, so I can come here and say generate key, and I can say for how long that keys need to be valid.
Just to be clear, so that's the process that you all go through. You have an app, footprint of theirs, and generate.
Yeah. So once you generate these keys, yeah.
Just wondering, so this is only available from here, correct?
From here. Yeah. No, not the UAT environment is available on the internet. Yeah.
One is anywhere it's not IP restricted, but because there's some additional content in the lower dev environment, one is promoted and more open, and it's like these two feature sometimes that you can hack it. That's where dev. It
Yeah.
really depends on, once we go through this exercise, we understand what we're trying to go after, we can potentially make either available.
Yeah, either available, yeah. The goal is, to make it internet accessible and then, restricted by token or some other mechanism. Yeah. So just, so when you subscribe and you generate your keys, what you see is, you have your consumer key, consumer secret generated, and then for execution, what you need is your access token. And that access token is a short-lived token, but what you have permanent as part of your app is your consumer key, consumer secret. And once you have that, then when you're actually invoking the APIs through your front-end applications, you primarily, there are some samples here that it provides how you can basically use those consumer key and consumer secret to generate your access token. So once the validity is over, you'll have to issue a refresh token to generate a new access token. So that way you can execute the API. So once I generated the key, once I go back to the API, so now I'm trying to execute the VC app with the production. It actually populates the key here for executing it here, but then if you want to execute the same API through any other SOAP, UI, Postman tool or front, and you primarily copy this, you use this code to generate your access token based on your consumer key, consumer secret. I'll just take one example here and, so now this has executed that API. So you see the request and response, and so this is how actually you go and play around with the API, and then you can primarily call the same API using this runtime URL. So what it gives you is this is the request URL. So this is what you use in your application along with those security tokens and execute it from your front end app. So what happens is now, since you have created a VC app, when you execute the different services here, all the statistics, everything is generated against that VC app. So like, you can go in here and, not the applications, if I go to the statistics, it will give you the API. So you have all the different apps, so it will show you the different APIs you have executed as part of the different apps that you have subscribed to. And then if you have different users, like, I've logged in here as demo user, but, if you have different users using the same app, then you can also then go in and look at, who are the top users of your app for those applications, so it will tell you. Yeah. Let me go back. So we have several APIs already available as part of this, and then you can use the search facility to drill down and search the APIs that you want using the search facility. Or when as part of the publishing process, we tag every API to tag the different APIs into a like kind of a group. So you can actually also then look at based on the tags, and you can, if you want to look at the lending APIs, you get it to lending API, so you can search that way also, or you can use the search that's available to look for different APIs. So there are different search parameters that is available. So by default, it's API, but you can then say provider, then it will say by provider name what APIs are there. You can, if you give description : something, then it will search the description of the APIs to bring you on a wildcard search, the different APIs that's available. So like if I go in and, say here, it'll bring me these. So these are all the REST APIs that has been defined. So it'll be across multiple categories, but it'll give you all the REST APIs that have been defined in the system. And then you can drill down to each of those individually. One thing I didn't touch on, when the portal that you land into, when you have access is, you can actually go here. We have some getting started pages, which primarily explains what I went through. So it basically talks about how you get started, how you can, come and register yourself on the portal, how you can create an app, how you can test an app. So it sort of gives you all the screenshots of the things that I went through. So you can sort of, use this to go through and understand, how to use the developer portal. We also have some help around how to test the API. So if you want to use any external clients to test the APIs like a SOAP UI or a Postman, you can, primarily this talks about how to test the APIs using some of the external clients. So how you can, come in and then get your security keys to access the APIs, and then, use the same in any external tool to execute those APIs. So it basically gives a description here of this. So that pretty much covers, the consumer side of the developer portal. So primarily it's all, once you have access, is coming in and exploring what is there. And of course, as part of next 2 days, we'll also want to understand from you as to what your needs are. And then, we can quickly start enabling some of those APIs on the API gateway. I was not sure whether you want to go into the publishing portal of part of it, or? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe now would be a good time to take 10 or so minutes to do the seeking And Setu, could you pull up the slide that has like the product portfolio or the?
Okay. Yeah, you can, yeah.
The one that shows like what's currently being added to the gateway?
Okay, sure. You want the card? Card? Yeah, you can. Let me, yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted y'all to do is just one
catch the CIF file updates that get spooled out.
Yeah, and so what we can go into more detail later, but basically being able to have the user authenticate the user rather than waiting 5 to 7 days and then calling the number.
Okay.
So I'm doing it this weekend, put wallet on it, let's do it. Right here. Okay. Who's next? Anthony, you look ready.
Do the banks provide that, or is that something that's?
I was wondering with all those products and services that FIS is getting somewhere. Everything that they're doing, right? Do you guys have any? I know, like, I don't know, you guys are so cute, I figured someone's doing it, right?
So, we actually have an internal system called Qualify that's used for deposit account origination, where we have an internal tool. We also, on loan applications, will pull bureau scores, and the retention for that information varies almost by that.
Okay, all right, so I'll put it in my wish list. Transaction history, something we're doing that I think is great, is our end user dashboard. Okay, so then my other ones are, here, Rob, you mentioned, and we talked about it briefly, but so there's an API, like how I do plan today for Yodlee. But then he mentioned these accesses to all these other systems, right? And the API being a gateway to these other systems. So for our platform, we're working with community banks, so we do ourselves at the front door. They're gonna get in with Linkit, start a relationship, but then obviously we're gonna then want elegantly from our digital platform, get them into other products and services. So my next sticky notes are about that, like if you have a really amazing loan origination platform or maybe a account opening platform, being able to take our application and elegantly.
You want to be a front end to some of those?
Yeah, exactly. So with those one are coming up there. So again, it's debit, credit card opening.
She wants to be the front end of the other tools already.
Yeah, so again, we get them in really easy and under a minute with a savings account. But obviously then the bank wants to grow their relationship and not just have a savings account. So how do we help them open a DDA account? How do we help them get an auto loan? How do we help them? Would that all be under kind of?
Let's put it other for now.
Okay.
Are you guys loading the ZMI API stack into the gateway?
Yes, ultimately, yeah.
Been there, and
Yeah.
And then I just think single sign on for.
Would you just buy React?
And then
That's a
also,
beer conversation.
so single sign on to core, but then also what our banks have asked for is the ability to easily turn it on their mobile.
single sign-on in general, and if it's a related category, well, it's where it fits in,
Yeah.
but have a different animal, so
Yeah, and it's really about us appearing in their current systems. Right now, we're
Absolute Chicken's right in for lunch. It's the best chicken strips in the South. And so you can go, it's out in the lobby, grab some food, come back in, we can chat, we can put more stuff up on the board, any of that good stuff. Feel free to invite the other FIS folks. I think there's plenty.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
Thanks, yeah.
Excited. Appreciate it.
What was it? Voice and trust?